So Jerome Powell is under a lot of pressure after lousy jobs numbers in the United States, and the market already expects several rate cuts. But are we actually going towards zero? Are we trying to stimulate the economy? So this is what we're going to be discussing today. First off, it's important to understand what the market is expecting. So for the Fed meeting, we discussed that ad nauseum about how pre-scheduled FOMC meetings create a huge problem because you have nothing to say until you have the actual data. So the market, the betting market is already expecting with over 70% for a 25 basis point cut. But almost 10% is already expecting 50 basis points or more, which is definitely the case of Jeff Snider. So I follow a lot of his work, and he's a perma bear. And on his opinion, we are going towards zero interest rates, and I'm going to be discussing why. But at the same time, we have Jim Bianco from Bianco Research, which I also respect, but putting many different reasons why we will never see zero interest rates again, which is a bold statement to say the least. And we are also not going to see any kind of money printing. So this is very interesting. So before we dive into that, we have to check our yield curve, and it's important for us to split that in two. So on the left, we have short-term debt. On the right, it's long-term. And these serve very different purposes. Why am I talking about that? Because that drives liquidity. This drives inflation and expectations and growth expectations. And this also drives Bitcoin. So if we look to the left, this is what I talk about all the time. This is collateral. This is needed by the market to generate credit. And why? Because it's short-term debt. Its prices are it's stable enough to make sure that it's used in a more stable fashion to generate that liquidity. In the right, it's a very long-term commitment. So 10-year yield that drives, for example, mortgages, or the 20 and 30-year yields. This here, it's more about inflation and growth expectations. And so far, they're kind of stable, but maybe going down. There are a lot of pressures going on, so many countercurrents. So this is why I would have a look to understand what's actually happening. The bond market tells us a lot of things. But before we go into that, we really discuss in the real economy the lousy numbers that are putting a lot of pressure on the Fed. So in our latest BI report, so we had seen in a very nice summary here about the payroll report and how the U.S. economy added only 73,000 jobs, and we have a huge problem with revisions as well, and payrolls being reduced. So many things that you can read about here. And of course, spending is slowing, consumption is slowing a lot. So the real economy is in trouble. That is a sign that the Fed has again missed the mark on cycles, which is what they do, really, right? So it's basically the Fed's job to be too late, so to speak. That's where Trump would be right on that matter, even though the mechanics of a rate cut does not stimulate the economy. We talk about that many times. Actually, it can create the opposite effect, which is exactly what Jim Bianco is saying. So if we just check the real economy, he's agreeing with many things that we're actually saying, that look, as soon as you don't have the growth, you don't show, so the Fed is actually late, but at the same time, cutting does not really work. You can have maybe a desperation. You can create an image that you are desperate to just cut those rates, and the 10-year yield can go higher than that. So this can create a lot of confusion. So we would expect a forward guidance where the Fed actually cuts and all of the other interest rates just follow. But just based on the shape of the yield curve, you see that it's not really that way. You have many other players working on buying bonds in many different durations for different reasons. And again, the U.S. debt is not about the United States itself; it's about the whole world. And of course, if you want to see more details about our reports and really understand what to do, how to really buy Bitcoin, also if of course a lot of on-chain analysis to understand deeply what's happening in the Bitcoin space, and also how monetary mechanics and the Fed policies and everything works towards the Bitcoin prices, you can check the link on the description. So let's go into Jim Bianco's argument. Basically, what he says is that the economy, the U.S. economy, went through a special moment between 2010 and 2020, which was the exception where we had zero interest rates, and that anomaly is never going to happen again. We have to live the new normal in what comes to interest rates being higher. He actually does not think that 4%, 5% are high interest rates at all. It's actually the opposite. He thinks it's going to be a new floor, especially when we need higher wages in the United States to grow the economy, since immigration is not compensating for demographics anymore because immigration just stopped. And also due to the fact that the world is deglobalizing, so there's a lot of friction, there's more tariffs, and this would create some pressure as well. Some numbers would not tend to agree with what he's saying. So if you see true inflation, for example, it's still lower than 2%. It's already under the mark of the 2% target from the Fed, which is completely arbitrary. But again, they would more than justify cuts, but you can also argue they would be absolutely political. On the other side, you see Jeff Snider saying, look, the yield curve tells us everything we need to know. If we check the yield curve again, you're going to see that this pressure for the 2-year yield, for the 3-year yield, this already tells us that the market requires collateral, requires safety and liquidity in order to protect themselves. And here you see the very, very short-term end of the curve, like the 1 month, the 3-month yield. Those are more they have more influence from the Fed, which is the Fed funds rate, the overnight. And now it's just a matter of time of the Fed to actually do what the yield curve is already doing. It's just going lower. So he believes that it's a matter of time for us to get back to zero interest rates, because every other central bank, like in Europe or even the Swiss bank, and even Japan has stopped hiking rates. So everybody's doing the same thing, and now we just have the United States that is just stuck at that. So we have to wait and see, but for sure the yield curve is very confusing right now with many countercurrents. But again, the base case, if you understand the economic cycle and what happens in the United States, it's just basically the markets going down and what comes to the real economy. But still, it has nothing to do with S&P 500 or Bitcoin, for example, where it just reflects liquidity. And you can have both at the same time. That's where bad news is good news. So the economy is absolutely separated from reality, and all that matters is liquidity, it's instruments. But again, those numbers are starting to catch up a lot, especially on payrolls, until we really have some terminations, some mass terminations in many companies. We're not there yet, but that's something that's a trend that we need to be focusing a lot. So you be the judge about Jim Bianco and Jeff Snider. Both have great points. We can actually take a few things of each one of them, but again, understanding liquidity is crucial, and eventually, especially when you have people losing jobs and withdrawing from their 401ks, for example, that could also affect financial markets. But for the time being, it's a lot of liquidity-driven market, a lot of collateral, and markets do not show any signs of weakening, even though the real economy is creating many problems. All right. So if you want to understand more details on how to act on it and invest, of course, you can always contact us or check the links on the description below. All right. See you in our next video.